Good morning. I'll call to order the regularly scheduled meeting of the Transportation Public Works Committee this day, February 19th, 2019. I'm Councilman Reich. I chair the committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmembers Johnson, Palmisano, Bender, Fletcher, and Gordon. We are a quorum, and we'll proceed with today's agenda, in which we have 18 posted items plus one additional addendum. I will go through the consent items and the addendum, which we'll have an explanation for when we get to that one. Item 3, the first consent item, is the 33rd Street East, Minnehaha Avenue to Highway Avenue Street Reconstruction Project designation and setting that public hearing, which will be April 23rd, 2019. Item 4 is the Hennepin Avenue project from Lake Street West to 36th Street West. It's a street reconstruction project and it's reimbursement from Metro Transit, an appropriation increase, amount listed. 5 is the Hennepin Avenue South reconstruction project, contract amendment. Details are included. Item 6 is the Hennepin Avenue South Streetcape project designation, cost estimate, and setting that public hearing, which will be April 23rd of this year. Item 7 is the 4th Street reconstruction project, contract amendment with Vite Company Incorporated. Item 8 is the Hennepin Avenue, this is Washington Avenue to 12th Street reconstruction project, acquisition of permanent right-of-way and temporary construction easement. Item 9 is the 2019 Minneapolis Open Streets and its approval and list of routes and dates for 2019. Very exciting stuff. Item 10 is the traffic zones restriction controls 2018 quarterly reports. Item 11 is the bid for the upgrades of Americans with Disabilities Act pedestrian intersection ramps. Item 12 is the bid for crushing rubble concrete. Item 13 is the bid for Hoyer Heights sanitary sewer replacement project. Item 14 is the bid for the North Loop paving street reconstruction project. Item 15 is the bid for ferric chloride system improvements project. And item 16 is the bid for turf establishment. And then the walk-on item is an agreement with the Minnesota Ballpark Authority and Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad for Metro Green line extensions. And perhaps we can get some details from the director. Good morning, Mrs. Hutchinson.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. This item is being added to today's agenda to be sensitive to the timeline of the forthcoming full funding grant agreement for the Southwest Light Rail Transit Project, or Metro Green Line Extension. It authorizes the staff to enter into an amended construction agreement between 3 parties, the BNSF, the Minnesota Ballpark Association, and the city. We have been working on a set of 3 final agreements that the city is a party to, 2 of which have come to you and been passed through the council already. This is the final agreement. Through collaborative discussions last week, it was determined that this 3-party agreement is the very best tool for all parties and raises the comfort level of all parties when granting access to BNSF for their maintenance purposes across the Cedar Lake Trail. This is consent today. You will be consenting to authorize staff to enter into final negotiations and an agreement that will be based on the parameters that are put forward for you today. And with that, we can answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions for any consent item or the addendum that was just described? See none, then I will move all items that were discussed in consent. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. Those items carry, and we can now move to the public hearing component of the agenda, beginning with item 1, 19th Avenue South, 4th Street South, 20th Avenue South Street Resurfacing Project Approval and Assessments. Director Hutchinson.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Mike Kennedy, the Director of Transportation Maintenance and Repair, will present information on this street resurfacing project approval and assessment item, and I'll hand it to Mike now.
Thank you, Director Hutchison. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Mike Kennedy. I'm the Director of Transportation Maintenance and Repair for Minneapolis Public Works. We're here for the public hearing for the resurfacing project of 20th, 4th, and 19th Streets downtown. On January 18th, 2019, the City Council designated the location, streets, and improvements proposed to be made in the 2019 street resurfacing program. 19th Avenue South, 4th Street South, and 20th Avenue South, as shown on the attached map, were included in this designation. Again, the streets that are included are 3 short segments of streets. It's a combination of local streets and MSA streets. The PCIs on these streets range from 60 to 40, which put them right in the sweet spot for this type of work. It's about 0.5, about a half a mile of streets total, and it's proposed to be a 2-inch mill and overlay. The project cost is $205,380, of which there's about $10,000 worth of assessments. And the University of Minnesota, a request will be made to the University of Minnesota for them to contribute their share or some of their share towards the project as well. There was a community meeting held on February 12th, and there were 4 invitees, as there are very few accessible properties, and there were no attendees at the project or at the meeting. So our recommendation this morning is passage of resolution ordering the work to proceed and adopting special assessments in the amount of $10,169.18 for 19th Avenue, 4th Street South, and 20th Avenue South Street Resurfacing Program, and passage of a resolution requesting the Board of Estimate and Taxation authorize the city's issuance and sale of assessment bonds in the amount as of enumerated for this project. That's my presentation, and we can stand for questions if there are any.
Are there any questions per the staff presentation? Seeing none, then we will proceed to the public hearing. This is public hearing for item number 1. Anyone signed in? No one signed in. Does anyone wish to come forward? Anyone wish to come forward? Seeing no one coming forward, I will close the public hearing and move item 1 as presented. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That item carries, and we can now go to public hearing number 2, the Kingfield Residential Street Resurfacing Project. Director Hutchinson.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, moving on to our second public hearing. This is a similar item. This is the Kingfield Residential Street Resurfacing Project. Approval and assessment. Again, Mike Kennedy with information.
Mr. Chair, again, Mike Kennedy from Public Works. Again, on January 18th, 2019, the City Council designated the completion of the 2019 resurfacing program. The Kingfield Residential Program was part of that, or project was part of that. This project consists of about a little over 5 miles of residential streets. It's proposed to be a 2-inch overlay. The cost of the project is $1,339,630, of which $960,900 would be assessed. And I'll mention here too that I should have before, the 2019 resurfacing rates will be used for the project, which are 66 cents per square foot for non-residential and 22 cents per square foot for residential. There was a community meeting held again on February 13th for this project. There were 9 attendees of some 80 notices that were mailed out. So our recommendation again this morning is passage of a resolution ordering the work to proceed for the Kingfield project and adopting special assessments in the amount of $960,898.23 for the Kingfield project, and passage of a resolution requesting the Board of Estimate and Taxation to authorize the city's issuance and sale of assessment bonds in the amount of $960,900 for this project. Again, that's my presentation, and we can take any questions if needed.
Are there any questions for staff per the presentation? Seeing none, I will then open the public hearing. We do have someone signed in. I will call that person Randy Crowell. Please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Yeah, it's Randy Kroll. It's 4300 Nicollet Avenue. It's a Midwest Cycle Supply. It's a motorcycle parts and accessory business. It's been there for 45 years. We've been on the corner. And I was unfortunately out of town at the Kingfield meeting, so I didn't hear any of what's going on there. I'm just coming and addressing the assessment for the property because of the things that are going on with the business in the area. For starting with, I'm opposing it because of the assessments that have been put on the businesses in the last number of years, and most importantly, the highway out here, which is everybody knows is closed and everything. And so our business is down 50%, basically half, from the highway being closed because people don't come from the north or the west or the east anymore. And even the south, the traffic is greatly reduced. So we're just trying to make it through here. And for us personally, like a year ago, we had a pipe break in the street, and that was not our water pipe, but the city's, but it was assessed to our business for $8,000. And then we had a fire inspection that resolved into 5 re-inspections, which cost us $10,000 and other things. And then also I have I'm dealing with the rain leader discount program right now that wants us to change the flow of the water off our roof. So they want us to change the construction of our building, which God knows how much that's going to cost. And then it comes around, I get this, on repaving the street. And to be honest with you, it took me 2 hours to get here this morning, and every road I drove on was in worse shape than 43rd Street, at least by our business. So I'm just kind of curious. Nicollet is in worse shape than 43rd Street, but we're paving these streets on the side, and it just seems kind of strange to me that that's the situation. And years and years ago, I used to come in and wait on customers and answer phone calls and stuff like that, and now I tend to just spend a lot of time dealing with these city, state, and county projects, and I don't know how much the small businesses in the area can actually support. I'm really surprised others didn't come in. They must not be dealing with, we deal with more people coming in from out of the area than just the basic local ones, and that's why it's hugely affected us. So I'm just opposing it because of the assessments that have been on the business so much lately, and the fact that I'd rather see that $4,500 that I'm going to be charged for it go to fixing this highway so we can get the city back into normal the way it should be. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else signed in? Anyone else wish to come forward, make comment? Anyone else wish to come forward? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. And perhaps staff could comment on how the streets were picked and what was the strategic thinking in having this particular layout of streets.
Mr. Chair, I'd be glad to talk about that. This is part of our neighborhood resurfacing program that was established in 2008, where we're attempting to extend the lifestyle. The work that we're doing will extend the life cycle of these streets for at least 10 years and defer much more expensive work into the future. We pick these projects because these are grouped into these streets by the original paving construction that was done, and so the condition of the streets are consistent throughout the area. Nicollet Avenue is an MSA street. It is not part of this project. It's a different funding mechanism, and it's an arterial street, so it is not included in this project. It may be in worse condition. The streets in Kingfield neighborhood are in okay shape, but they are within the window that we normally do this program, and they will benefit from this work. They'll benefit that life extension from this work. This business, being on the corner of 43rd and Nicollet, is within the influence zone of 43rd Street for part of this project, so they'll be paying their share, which is just a partial compared to some of the other properties that have a full, their full area is assessed. And then sometime in the future when Nicollet is paved, they will see a little bit less of a project there because of the way the influence areas work. So if there are any other questions, I don't know if I answered everything that needs to be.
I think that covers the general. Director Hutchinson.
Mr. Chair, I might add that the gentleman presented a number of concerns that are related to other areas of public works that we would be happy to help answer questions about. I also want to recognize that major reconstruction, 35W, is impactful to neighborhoods. We understand that, and we may be able to pass along information and resources for you about that project as well, ways to connect with MnDOT. So we'd be happy to talk with you afterwards about some of your other concerns outside of the assessment and some of the issues with the 35W project.
Thank you. Any further questions on this item? Well, then I'll move the item before us. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. We can now go to our two discussion items, which are annual affairs that we have, these great reports from our very active advisory committees, starting with item 17, the Minneapolis BAC. Director Hutchinson.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm always so pleased to be able to introduce this item. This is the third year that I've had the privilege of doing this. We work very closely with the Bicycle Advisory Committee and the Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and they provide us extremely valuable guidance and support in the work that we do. They are all volunteers, as you know. They devote their own time to making Minneapolis better, a better place for people walking, a better place for people biking. They push us to think more broadly. They provide us insights as to what it feels like out there. And I would like to personally thank them for their extensive work with us this past year and welcome everyone who's here to support the presentation. I also would like to introduce and call out the work of Matthew Doodle, who for years has been our lead staff person on walking and bicycling, and who helps to make the meetings that we participate in with our Back and Pack as productive as possible. So with that, I'll thank Matthew for his work and turn it to him.
Good morning, Mr. Drill.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, committee members, again, my name is Matthew Deardahl, Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator in the Transportation Planning and Programming Division of Public Works. So this is one of my favorite days in the job. I have the pleasure of working with the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committees every week. There's something. There's either a subcommittee meeting or a full committee meeting or preparing for this presentation. I truly enjoy it. The members are passionate, they're energetic, they care about the city, and they show up to a lot of different things, including here today. So I'm going to start out with a brief overview of the committees, and then Alyssa Kaufman, Vice Chair of the BAC, will help tee up the annual report based in the context of city priorities. I just want to give a quick shout out to Nick Mason, the chair of the BAC. He couldn't make it today, but he cares deeply about the annual report as well. He helped us in this presentation, and he is very comfortable with Alyssa, Vice Chair, taking over today, and then is excited for you to meet a new voice. And then finally, Julia Tabbitt, Chair of the PAC, will share some key resolutions and highlights from 2018. Julia is one of our most veteran PAC members. This is her 8th year on the PAC, and we're excited for you to hear from her as well. And then finally, I want to acknowledge the other PAC and BAC members who attended the presentation today in the audience. Julia Curran on the PAC, Emily Wade, Ward 10 in the BAC, Aaron Berger on the PAC, Joshua Hodak is on the BAC as a Park Board rep, who's right here. Tony Drollinger, Metro Transit Agency rep, Abigail Johnson on the PAC, and then Paul St. Martin as well on the PAC. Suzanne Murphy is our council aide representative on the PAC, and Robin Garwood, who I know is watching, he told me, is our BAC council rep. And then finally, Matthew Hendricks as well, Ward 6 for the BAC. And I mentioned Tony Drollinger. I just want to highlight that we have about 12 to 13 agency representatives on the PAC and the BAC, and they show up every month and provide a lot of feedback and advice from their professional perspective, and that includes Metro Transit, Met Council, CPED, Health Department, and others. Valuable members of the PAC, and I think a unique feature of our advisory committees. So real quick on the overview, both committees' bylaws commit them to submitting the annual report. The respective reports are included in your attachments. Overall, you'll notice the resolutions are very supportive of the work. You get a short summary in your packet, but their full resolutions often include a summary of things that they like about the resolution or areas where they would like us to maybe push a little harder or do something different or more. A brief overview of the PAC structure. Each committee has 2 full meetings a month, and then each committee also has 2 subcommittees per month. So the BAC has an engineering subcommittee and then what we call a 5E subcommittee, and that includes equity, valuation, education, encouragement, and enforcement. And the Pedestrian Advisory Committee has also an engineering subcommittee, and then their non-engineering subcommittees called programs and policies. I also want to note that we are currently accepting applications for the Pedestrian Advisory Committee. They are all at large, 15 members at large, and those applications are due April 19th. And then finally, every year we highlight the commitment of the committees, which is huge. They provide thousands of hours collectively over the year. But this year, they went, I would say, even more above and beyond through a variety of activities outside the regular meetings. So what you have on the screen before you is some pictures of pedestrian advisory committee members showing on a thaw day how you can get out and clear some curb ramps, clear some excess ice off the sidewalks. And we've been working with communications on providing winter maintenance communications throughout the year, and this is an opportunity for a future thaw day to highlight that. And then in conjunction with Our Streets Minneapolis, members of which are here today, Nick Ray is there, and Emily Wade works for Our Streets as well. We did a walk promotions pilot this year called We Walk MPLS, and PAC members participated in that, and the idea was to highlight positive walking stories to give people encouragement and think that they might be able to try walking and taking transit that day. And then finally, this year in particular, in 2018 also in particular, we have a lot of work groups around projects and the Transportation Action Plan and Vision Zero. And so these are hours outside of regular meetings that they contribute to the city. So that concludes my introduction. Alyssa Kaufman is going to take the next phase.
Thank you, Matthew. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm going to also give a shout out to Dan Miller, who serves on the Bicycle Advisory Committee, and Peter Vader, who just walked in. We have a very big crowd here today. So as Matthew said, my name is Alyssa Kaufman. I'm vice chair of the Minneapolis Bicycle Advisory Committee. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I have lived in Ward 9 for about 5 years, and I am really excited to be here talking to you today because before I moved to Minneapolis, I drove everywhere, and now I'm a much happier year-round cyclist. I'm going to talk a little bit about some key themes for our work moving forward, just to contextualize how we're thinking about success, and then I'll turn it over to Julia to talk about some of our major priority areas from 2018 and highlight some key recommendations from the past year. First and most important, the city's priorities are our priorities. We're all in this together. We're residents, we're stakeholders. We want to see the city reach its fullest potential and be its most thriving. The Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committees named climate change and equity as two huge work areas that the city had identified that we also wanted to keep at the center of our work in 2018 and for 2019. So as we talk to you about success this year and our key themes for the future, we're really excited because they're successes and opportunities for the whole city because they're tied into city goals. The first major theme of our work in 2019 is planning. Big surprise. First, I just want to list all the things that the PAC and the BAC have helped inform or will keep working on in 2019. It's a long list. These include the City of Minneapolis Comprehensive Plan, the Transportation Action Plan, Vision Zero, the ADA Transition Plan, the Winter Maintenance Study, the Greenway Study. We're doing a lot of planning. And the City and Public Works priorities are all really deeply enmeshed in these plans. And what's really exciting about it is that we're in a period where everything that we do is impacting not only right now, but the next 2, 5, 10, 20 years. We're paying a lot of attention to these policies and how they're supporting that vision of an equitable Minneapolis that not only meets, but maybe exceeds its climate change goals. Let's dream big. We are leading the nation in many ways. The coverage of 2040 illustrates this, and it's something we should celebrate. At the same time, we have a lot to do because we want to keep leading the way on transportation. Because we've done so much, we can and we should be pushing ourselves to keep envisioning what more can we do. We've shown as a city that we have the imagination to be visionaries, and at the BAC and the PAC, we're very excited that we've built this strong foundation through planning, and we can keep being visionary in new ways. Another theme that's really woven through our conversations for 2019 is new methods of mobility. Sometimes it's termed micro-mobility or advanced mobility or shared mobility. What we're really talking about is the new and emerging ways that people are getting around. And as committees, we're cognizant of the fact that streets are rapidly evolving. The options available to people now aren't what are always going to be available. And when we think about the future of sidewalks and of bike lanes, we're also thinking about what questions are relevant. How do we adapt? How do we have a plan? If we didn't see scooters coming even a year ago, what else might surprise us? What might we need to be thinking about in terms of how autonomous vehicles change our interaction with our streetscape? Key to answering these questions is not getting too fixated on mode, but thinking about the people who are getting around in different ways. Part of the reason we're having a joint presentation is because people cross modes. I'm a person, I walk, I bike, I take the bus, I take the train, I drive. I'm a person who was hit by a car once and experienced limited mobility because I was on crutches for months. How we're getting around changes all the time because our bodies change, we age. And thinking about how people want to get around is going to help us be flexible in our response and create designs and policies that are adaptable for these future changes. Another key theme for 2019 is winter maintenance. Winter maintenance has made great strides recently, and we are all so optimistic and so happy that people are talking about it and thinking about it and prioritizing it. It's huge, it's in the news, everyone's talking about winter maintenance. And at the same time, we know there's a lot left to do. We're a city with a lot of weather, and street maintenance and winter maintenance are a huge way that our commitment to complete streets shows up. We've done a lot of work around our complete streets policy, and when I, as a resident of Minneapolis, envision us fully embodying our complete streets policy as a city and living true to the spirit of complete streets as a value, it means that we plow sidewalks before we plow streets. It means that we shift our work so that we put sidewalks and curb ramps and bus stops first, and then bike lanes, and then we talk about how much is left for cars. If you were in a wheelchair and wanting to get around the city last Tuesday or Wednesday, you couldn't do it. And when we're thinking about a Minneapolis that is fully equitable and accessible for everyone, that's the bar, and we have to clear it. I'm not suggesting that that's easy. Holding a vision like this is hard. Implementing it is hard. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It just means we have work to do to become the city that we are striving every day to be. And we should be excited because we have had the foresight and the imagination to come up with a vision, and we have a roadmap to do the hard work of change. Now that I've talked a little bit about vision, I'm going to turn it over to Julia for a bit.
Actually, past that? Okay, great. I wasn't sure if we'd missed that. Good morning. I'm Julia Tabbitt. I'm the chair of the Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and she or they pronouns work great for me. So our missions are a little bit different, but I would summarize them both as being to promote both more and safer walking and biking for fun and transportation. So toward those goals, we've passed a lot of resolutions this year, 66 altogether, 38 by the BAC and 28 by the PAC. And those resolutions address things like CIP funding, policies, and the planning that Alyssa talked some about, as well as a ton of infrastructure projects. And altogether, as Matthew suggested, we've put in probably more than 2,000 hours of volunteer time over the past year. So again, each committee suggested some things for the capital improvement projects, and we kind of wanted to highlight some of our suggestions here. So first, we're really excited about the potential for greenways. And that word has a lot of different meanings, but by whatever definition you think of it, we definitely want more of them. So it'd be great to have some dedicated funding for especially paths through neighborhoods that are dedicated to biking and walking. We're really excited to have more piloting happening. So bollards and rails and paint and other temporary treatments are a really quick and cheap way to see if something works and to improve safety in the meantime. And these capital projects are a really good, important way to fund things that are hard to fund in other ways, such as bike and pedestrian bridges over the rivers and trails and other things like that. So there are some things that we would love to see happening that CIP is the one path that we see toward. So our committees have some different lists of E words that we use to structure our efforts. And our e-lists are actually a little bit different, but we share and really have focused on in the past year education, enforcement, and equity. So the first of those, education, Matthew mentioned a social media campaign highlighting the benefits of walking that we're really pleased to see Public Works promoting, and a lot of our members on the PAC were highlighted in that as well, so we definitely participated in that. The BAC has done some support for the Bike Walk Fun curriculum that Bike Min put together, and that's a way of reaching kids early, and studies have shown that when kids, especially, and any young people become comfortable with these alternative modes of transportation, they're a lot more likely to choose them later. So that applies to biking and walking and transit. So education aimed at children is a really good way of causing long-term culture change and shifts. And I know that Alyssa has some personal experience with biking that she wants to share as well.
Actually, I'm going to talk about walking for a second because I am the kid who walked to school and now is choosing different ways to get around other than a car. I used to walk starting from age 8, about 1.5 miles each way to school. I would pick up a friend on the way. Sometimes she chronically ran late and I was a really punctual kid, so sometimes I would just leave her behind. But those walks to school are some of my fondest memories of learning how to be independent. And I know that it was great for my parents also to not have to worry about getting me to and from school every day. So when we think about what does it look like for kids to grow up and choose other things, that's us. We're here. We're doing it. Thanks.
And so education is a really good way of leading a culture shift, and we would love to get more into educating drivers too on the impact of some of their choices, especially drivers who may not bike or walk as much. And we prefer that to some of the other ways of culture change, such as enforcement, because enforcement can be really tricky and sometimes problematic. And this is something that we've discussed a lot on both committees, and there's conflict both within our committees and even sometimes within the individuals on our committees. So we see drivers running red lights, we see drivers speeding, we see property owners neglecting their icy sidewalks. And we know that people fall and are hurt. We know that people are hit and injured. People are even killed because of these behaviors and choices. And so to see little or no consequences for those things is really frustrating and heartbreaking to us. It causes a lot of harm to people. But we also know that consequences applied unequally, which definitely happens in our current system, and an increase in enforcement that in any way increases the potential for police intimidation and violence causes a greater harm and is even sometimes more heartbreaking. So that's a conversation that's ongoing in our committees. How much do we want to promote enforcement when we know that that's a potential consequence? And Vision Zero has really highlighted that controversy for us because some ways of implementing that have enforcement as a really central piece. And we just think it's essential that as those policies are developed and fleshed out, that the people who are most likely to kind of bear the brunt of increased enforcement and whose existence is most likely to be criminalized, it's really essential that those people are guiding the conversations as we develop those policies as a city. But we do know, however anybody feels about enforcement, we do know that what exists now isn't totally working. And we can sort of avoid the problem altogether if we build systems that just work without having to force anybody to conform to a certain behavior. So, for example, if the city just clears sidewalks, we never have to fine anybody. And if the roads are designed to slow drivers, we never have to give people speeding tickets. So that's how we are currently thinking about that. Equity, too, is a really central thing for many of us. So a lot of us are motivated in this work with equity in mind. So the city defines equity as a fair and just opportunities and outcomes for all people. But because things in the city have been so unfair and unjust for so long, it's really important in rebalancing to give extra attention, focus, and funding to neighborhoods and communities with more people of color and less wealth. And we really support this focus that we've seen in the development of the 20-year streets funding plan and also what we've seen in the transportation action plan discussions. We also, on our committees, think of equity in terms of modal equity, which is something that the Complete Streets policy aims to do. So cars have been so dominant in our culture for so long that to really properly shift things and rebalance, it's really important to put extra attention on other options. So those things are really big issues and hard to sometimes measure our success and even like know that we're making success. So we wanted to be sure to also reassure ourselves and you that we have made concrete progress on some other things. So there are a lot of projects in 2018 that we were really happy to see completed, including protected bikeways on Plymouth Avenue and 11th Avenue with concrete medians, a sidewalk gap that was closed on Chicago Avenue, bump outs on 6th Street and Cedar Riverside that improved pedestrian street crossing safety, temporary bump outs at 15th Street and Oak Grove, and a pilot treatment at the Midtown Greenway and 29th Avenue South that was turned permanent, which we're pleased about. And finally, the opening of Samotar Crossing, which is now available for use without cars. We're very pleased about that as well.
In conclusion, 2040 is amazing. It has so much in it, and we're here because we want those things also. The city is doing a huge thing, and we are excited to be able to help. We are here because we want to take our vision of Complete Streets further, to advance climate change, to advance Vision Zero goals. Complete Streets is how we get there, and we're really excited about it. Thank you so much for your time.
We really appreciate your time and are happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions per the presentation? Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this report and this update. I am curious from your comments about enforcement and how your committee, it's complicated and it's complex. And I'm curious, how connected or knowledgeable does the BAC and the PAC feel on the enforcement side of things? As we get to this more integrated work, it requires some new kinds of conversations and communication, and I'm just curious how you felt you've gotten information, whether it's data or whether it's MPD conversations with you, and I'm just curious how that part is going, because the enforcement part of some of these initiatives like Vision Zero is really complicated.
It is complicated, and feel free to add more after I say this. I mean, in terms of MPD input, like, we haven't ever had quite as much representation from police on our committees as we'd like. In theory, we have a spot for them, but there hasn't always been a lot of interaction there. So mostly right now, this is like theoretical debates that we're having. It's less about data and more about what do we want to envision and what do we want to push for. Does that help answer the question, or do you want to add more?
It does. I think many were taken by surprise at the last Public Safety Committee to find out that the MPD dissolved their traffic unit years ago, and that would certainly impact some of your conversations and thoughts about enforcement.
Councilmember Fletcher. Followed by Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank everybody who's participated in these commissions and who's been advocating for bicycle and pedestrian experience around our city. This is one of the more proactive sets of commissions that we have volunteers working really hard on. I think that the work has been of a really high quality, really thoughtful, and is one of the commissions I think that has has had more successful give and take with the department. So I think Public Works does a really good job of engaging, and we see ideas coming out of these commissions, as well as these commissions responding to ideas that are coming from Public Works, and that's how this should be working. This is great. So I want to just really appreciate the work that's happening there, and also acknowledge the continued work on the enforcement conversation that I think is something that we are going to dig a lot deeper into, and I think it's worth just naming as an aspirational goal that MPD and Public Works and these commissions should be in more of a dialogue and aren't right now. I think that it's something that we haven't sort of made happen as a city to get MPD to the table in these conversations, so that our enforcement is aligning with the values that we're putting forward around how people get around and how we're using our streets. So lots of work to be done. I appreciate the agitational components of this presentation, as well as acknowledging our successes, and appreciate this presentation a lot. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much, and really appreciate the presentation. I have a couple questions. One has to do with the makeup of the two groups. I know for a long time, especially with the Bicycle Advisory Committee, we thought there was a pretty dramatic gender imbalance. So I'm wondering, I mean, it's feeling today like we've improved in that, but I'm not quite sure. I'm also curious about the diversity in terms of representation citywide, and then people of color and other cultures on the groups. Do you think there's, well, what are we doing anything right, and are there areas where we could improve?
I think the gender balance is decent right now. I mean, you can see that there are women presenting today, so that's good, and several in the audience as well. I think we're pretty close to halvesies on that. Racial representation is an ongoing conversation as well, and not something that we as committees feel fully equipped by ourselves to change, though we would love to see it changed. Geographic representation, I think, is decent, especially because yours is ward specific. Ours gets a little imbalanced geographically sometimes, but I think overall is healthy. But agreed that our committees overall are fairly white, and that's something that we would like to see changed, and are doing what we can to change that, you know, in terms of our recruitment strategies and so forth.
Yeah, I would agree that at the BAC that's been an ongoing conversation. We've talked about logistics and childcare, phone-in options, stipends. Do we change meeting times? Because we know that all of those things are, I mean, this meeting is in the middle of the work week in the morning, and there are folks who can't come. So we're thinking and talking about all those things. The BAC is a little heavier in terms of male gender. I think it's about 2-to-1 last time I counted, but I didn't count specifically before this presentation and should have. So definitely we do still have some work to do in that area as well, at least on the BAC side.
And you don't necessarily have to answer this part, but the other thing that I'm sometimes interested in is kind of the different perspectives that people bring to the groups, and with the pedestrian side that might relate to how mobile and what you use in terms of if there's somebody that's in a wheelchair or has more challenges, it might be getting around than others. And in the biking end of it, I think when I first got on the council, it was clearly dominated by people who were very comfortable riding in the street a lot and loved biking and did it all the time. And we were kind of pushing and hoping to broaden that a little bit more to get people who were concerned about safety and maybe not. We used to talk about the A biker and the B biker and the C. I don't know if people still do that. Is that still a thing? That's something that we look forward to, and you're welcome to comment on that if you want.
Yeah, and I just want to add too about more racial representation. That's something, again, that I mentioned even here, like when we're talking about these policies that are being created, like don't just talk to us. Like we try to also push the people getting our opinion to find other people to talk to, because we know that we're not fully representing things. So I just wanted to add that. I do think the Pedestrian Advisory Committee specifically is really good, or has been good, at bringing in people with different physical abilities, and I think there are several, like a big age range that's represented on our committees, parents with small children, people who are older, and then also one member who has been there the entirety of my tenure who uses a wheelchair, and always at least one member who's blind. So there is a good representation, I think, on our committee in that sense.
I think for the BAC, we also have a really wide age range, which is great. And also one of the things that in my role as vice chair and as our 5Es chair have made a point to do is build a relationship with the chair of the MACAPOD committee, the Minneapolis Advisory Committee on People with Disabilities, and have attended some of those meetings to really recognize that they have a lot of knowledge to offer and they're offering it, and we should be receiving that knowledge too.
I'm also curious if you've worked into the work plan for this year, helping us develop our transportation plan. And I think you mentioned it on the first slide. And I also want to know if you feel like, if you have worked it into your work plan, if there's a good partnership there with the council and with the public works staff in terms of playing a role in that.
Well, I know several people, I think from each of our committees, were recruited into these work groups for the different components of the Transportation Action Plan specifically. So several of us were in on hours of meetings over the past few months trying to establish some of the baseline stuff for those. So that's happened. In terms of the ongoing connection to it, I don't know if we've specifically made that plan, and that's a good reminder that we should be sure to do so.
That's going to be really key that we get that plan right, and we're going to need your involvement, and we're going to need you to speak up. I just want to appreciate all the work that you do. I appreciate that you take formal actions and resolutions and weigh in on things. I also appreciate that it feels like you're comfortable challenging policymakers and staff if you think there's an issue that the groups disagree with or think we're not doing enough. I think it's important to do that. I mean, I don't want you to create fights where none needs to happen and all of that. I think it's a tricky balance sometimes, but to be a constructive partner in this effort, and I think that you are and you can be. I'm always curious to know if there's more that we can do as committee members or as a council to support the advisory group. So if you have any last words of wisdom, that would be great. And I know that I really like it when your position aligns with mine, and I really appreciated your focus here on winter maintenance and looking at what we can do, and we're all looking at it. And I know inspections are going on, and we think we have great compliance, but then any of us walks around and looks at corners and intersections after all this snow, and we go, we must do more. So I'm hopeful we can develop some pilots to try and slowly tiptoe into getting more responsibility as a government entity into taking care of some of these areas. But that was sorry, I jumped on the soapbox. But is there something that we could do more to support you as a council, I guess was the question.
That's a big question. Yeah, I mean, I guess as often as you feel willing, listen to whatever it is that we're saying, seek our opinions, I mean, there are so many different topics that come up and things that come through, so it would be hard to name one thing for me, I think.
And you can always give us feedback on that question later, but go ahead. Anything else?
I appreciate the ongoing dialogue. I appreciate that this is a Q&A conversation, not just a question and answer. And I think that we want to stay in dialogue and keep talking about our successes and challenges and what's next.
Very good. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate the presentation and all the work you do. So echoing the sentiment of my colleagues on this, I have two questions for you. The first on the recommendations page. I know you recommended, for instance, different capital improvement changes around funding. Do you have specific recommendations on that, on levels of funding or areas where maybe we should change our priorities?
I don't know that we've ever submitted specific numbers, have we, or have we?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Mr. Chair, Committee Member Johnson. So as you are well aware, the city's always working on the capital improvement program throughout the year. And towards the end of every year, the BAC and the PEC weigh in on recommendations that they would like to see in there. And then that kind of goes into the Public Works court as we gear up for CLIC. As far as official numbers, I don't believe that the PAC or BAC has expressed a specific number for each of the programs, but more support for the existing programs and support for increased funding when and where appropriate.
I appreciate that. I guess my feedback or comment on that would be I understand the role of the CLIC committee, and I kind of think of this as checks and balances. So I personally would be interested if the BAC or PAC has any recommended changes to what comes out to strengthen around that going forward in future budgets as we're considering that. That's something I'd personally like to see. And then I also have another question for you, which is that certainly Public Works is very actively involved with our Intergovernmental Relations Committee and work. So we look at all sorts of state policy changes, bonding issues. To what degree does that enter into the conversations at your respective committees? And are you looking at not just internally at the Public Works projects and policies, but also thinking about how can we leverage state legislation and bonding to try to tackle some of these goals?
First, specific to the CLIC question, that's something that I really love to discuss with the committee. The Bicycle Advisory Committee actually has a member who also serves on CLIC, and I think he would have some really great insights for us to be able to have that conversation. As far as state funding, I think we, obviously the Bicycle Alliance Minnesota is a partner of ours. I also work at Move Minnesota, which does advocacy for statewide funding, and so I think we as a committee and as a group are aware that we need to be leveraging those resources and bringing that into the conversation. And as a committee, we don't engage in formal advocacy at that level.
Certainly. And I'm the chair of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, so I just extend the offer that as you're looking at what could improve across these different measures in the city, having that conversation around legislation that's up before the state, it'd be great to get that feedback from you all around the different legislation, the priorities, or things we're not even thinking of, so that that can then enter into our conversation with Public Works as we continue that constant ongoing process around intergovernmental relations. I'd say the same thing applies to when thinking about work before Met Council or the county and how we interface with them and have those conversations so that we can make sure we're thinking of everything and able to carry on as well and have your conversations enter into those conversations too. Again, thanks for all the work.
Yeah, and thank you. That's really useful because I know that we have a lot of conversations about what might need to change at the state level and so on, but we don't always feel like we have access to influence that as much because we are a Minneapolis committee. So good to know. Thanks.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both so much, and thanks to all the volunteers for all of the time. I started attending BAC meetings in 2009 and served on that committee until I took office, so that occurs to me that it was a decade ago. And I just want to pause and acknowledge the enormous shift that has happened in the last 10 years in the city and how much the efforts of the BAC and the PAC have led that. And the folks who were there even before me, Matthew and Joshua and Neil and Georgiana, and folks who've been there as long as Julia know that, I mean, it's even a shift to have the BAC and the PAC up here presenting together. Because in the bad old days, pedestrians and bicyclists were pitted against each other for a tiny amount of road space that was left over when we planned for cars. And, you know, we had to sort of build those bridges, and a few years ago, the BAC and the PAC started presenting together, and that partnership is critical to the whole philosophy, the philosophical shift that our city has taken, which is that we're no longer designing streets for cars with a little bit of space left over for biking and walking, but rather centering people in our street design from the beginning. And our staff have led that shift. The BAC and the PAC have led that shift, and many folks here, including the chair, have been really critical to that shift. So I think we're in a time where we have political support, staff support and leadership, and then community support. And I agree and appreciate so much the call to do more and do better. It's a time where we have momentum and a time to even take it to that next level. I want you to know that as the chair and vice chair of this committee and the president of the council, Councilmember Reich, and I are on the steering committee for the the TAP, the Transportation Action Plan update. And it has been a priority for us and Councilmember Warsami to make sure that the BAC and PAC are included in all of the planning and engagement, and that has been welcomed by staff. So we look forward to your continued leadership as we develop the details of that plan. I want to thank all of the staff, especially it's so cool to have Metro Transit here today. Thank you. We don't have a transit advisory committee at the city, so we are going to rely on you, on the BAC and the PAC, to help us take our transit planning to the next level. And many of you I know are transit users and transit riders. I'm really excited about the ways that we can make our local streets better for transit and really improve how we design city streets and work together with our partners to make our transit operations more efficient and reliable. It's a critical piece of our Minneapolis 2040 plan. And I also wanted to thank you all for weighing in on that, because biking and walking and taking transit in the city relies on us making good land use decisions and good design decisions for buildings. And so I think it is 100% within the purview of your committees to help guide the city's growth and development. We've seen you do that, and I want to invite you and appreciate so much that you have gone beyond just the sidewalk or the intersections, and you're thinking big about how do we really design a city that works for biking and walking and transit. So thank you so much. It's really energizing to have you here and to hear from you, and we appreciate all of the time that you put in.
If there's no other commentary, thank you, Council President. I think that really sets a tone and a sort of a spirit of partnership that I think pervades all through the work, and what work it is. I mean, the numerical hours that you folks put in, the type of work, the depth of conversation you have is really unprecedented, and it's really bespeaks our system. We can say we're #1 bike city, and we can measure it in miles or whatever they do in those terms in ridership. But really, the missing equation, the X factor, is really what your work. And I would not leave this Diaz today and say, oh, you are invited to help us with our big plans that we have, or you're allowed to participate. We actually depend on that participation for it to be the products that we need them to be, and they're big. These are things that go beyond just the day-to-day evaluation and sort of prioritization of budget. These are the plans that are going to mark out the next decade. The Transit Action Plan will mark out the next decade of work we do. The Vision Zero will mark out probably, I don't know, even more than a decade of work and planning and results that really matter too. We're talking life and death, and it can get to be that serious, the work that you guys are involved in. And so we are absolutely dependent on the work moving forward and your participation. And thank you for what you've done today. And I would also say that the fact we had all this back and forth, I mean, we can usually fly through a lot of work up here because it's so perfunctory, but get you guys up there and all of a sudden we're this engaged committee participating right along with you, and you guys fielding all those questions on the fly. It was very, very impressive. So look forward to next year and the work in between. With that, since it was a joint presentation, can we approve both items simultaneously? Receive and file both items 17 and 18, which is our Minneapolis Bicycle Advisory and Report, and our Pedestrian Advisory and Report that was given jointly. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries, and we are done with today's business. Thank you.